I had over 50 neurological and gut symptoms when I was 24 years old. I was very sick, to say the least. At that point, I was so sick, I was actually walking with a cane because a lot of my motor functions were shutting down. I had trouble actually opening and closing my hands at times. I had trouble with that connection, the mind and the body, to get my body to make my legs work. I was in such excruciating pain in my hips, my knees, my ankles, my muscles that I needed this cane to just get myself moving, to get myself walking. When I wasn't using a cane, I was bedbound at certain points in my journey. And that was really when I went through my ultimate rock bottom, or what a lot of people say, the dark night of the soul.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Nourished Inside Out. I am here with Vanessa today. She is a self-healing coach, and she helps people create safety and trust within themselves again. Thank you so much for joining us, Vanessa.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today.
Yes, I'm so excited as well. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your journey and your background and how you became a self-healing coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey started with my own chronic illness and health issues. So when I was a child, I had a string of different symptoms and illnesses that were never really put together as a holistic system and holistic thing that was going on. I had ADHD, I had insomnia, I had joint pain, but no one really tied this together. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s when my health really got so much worse. I was to the point where I was having these episodes where I would black out. I couldn't remember where I was. I was having terrible heart palpitations. I felt like I was going to pass out all the time. And I was having numbness through my entire body, and also terrible joint pain. So that's when I really realized something was going wrong in my system, and I needed to figure out what it was. So as many people go through with chronic illness, it took me a bit of time to figure out and get a diagnosis. I saw many doctors, many healers throughout my journey to finally get diagnosed with chronic neurological Lyme disease and POTS, which is a heart condition. I was also diagnosed with a few other things like SIBO, leaky gut. I had anxiety, depression, parasites. I was dealing with mold. So it was like an endless onslaught of symptoms. I had over 50 neurological and gut symptoms when I was 24 years old. I was very sick, to say the least. At that point, I was so sick, I was actually walking with a cane because a lot of my motor functions were shutting down. I had trouble actually opening and closing my hands at times. I had trouble with that connection, the mind and the body, to get my body to make my legs work. I was in such excruciating pain in my hips, my knees, my ankles, my muscles that I needed this cane to just get myself moving, to get myself walking. So when I wasn't using a cane, I was bedbound at certain points in my journey. And that was really when I went through my ultimate rock bottom, or what a lot of people say, the dark night of the soul. I was on many different treatments. Over 4 years, I tried numerous treatments, numerous doctors, numerous healers, numerous modalities, until ultimately I found the right combination for me, which was diet, lifestyle, different herbs and supplements, and nervous system regulation, which is what ultimately healed me over a 4-year time span. So I healed myself, took 4 years, and then I reached remission. Many doctors had told me that this was something I was going to have to live with for life, and I refused to believe that. I made it my goal to become symptom-free. I refused to believe that I would ever go back to whatever relapse. It was just not an option for me. And being the stubborn person I am, I just went all in. So even after I technically reached remission, I would say I was probably feeling about 90% better. when I reached remission, I decided to continue on. I decided to keep this lifestyle for life, not as strictly as I once was, but I continue to this day to put in so much effort into my health and well-being so that way I can stay healthy. And along that journey was when I discovered my purpose, which was helping others come back to themselves and come back to their healthy version of them so that they can live their purpose and do what they were meant to do here on this earth. After I had healed, I had become a coach. I am a functional medicine health coach. I am a neurolinguistic programming practitioner. I am an EFT and hypnotherapist. This is really where my passion lies. For a while, I helped people with nutrition, with chronic illness and neurological symptoms. And then I realized there was this big disconnect where people just didn't feel safe in their body. And that was not allowing them to heal fully. Because if you don't trust yourself with your decisions and getting you through your life, and if you don't have safety in your body and believe in your ability to heal, it really puts up a roadblock on your healing journey. And that was something I had to learn through my journey. And now that's what I teach others.
You have such an incredible story. I don't even know where to start with the question. There's so many things that you said that are just so beautiful. What was your mindset like when you were going through those challenges? I know that you were saying that you didn't want to believe what the doctors were saying, that that's what your life was going to be like forever. But you said, no, I refuse to believe that. Was your mindset always like that, or is it something that you had to adapt to? How did that play a role?
Yeah, absolutely. I was not in a good place for a long time. Chronic illness is one of the worst things someone can go through, like especially as sick as I was, 24, I lost everything, right? I could barely work, lost all my friends because they couldn't understand at 24 years old why I couldn't party, drink, hang out anymore when I could barely have enough energy to shower and just be ready for the day. It was so weak. I was not myself at that point. So the first, it took me a little bit of time to really believe I was sick. So at first I was like, I know something's wrong with me, but I hadn't reached the rock bottom yet. And it was when I finally got diagnosed, the treatment that I was put on ended up being too strong for my body. I was on 3 different antibiotics that actually made me so sick. I had an allergic reaction. I ended up in the hospital. And that was my rock bottom. That was like, oh my God, I actually am unsure if I'm going to survive this. And that was the moment for me, the scariest moment, the rock bottom, where I was very much in a victim mindset. It took me about 8 months. I was in a really, really tough place mentally. I was like, why is this happening to me? Am I even going to survive this? I was so scared, and I was not in a good place. And then it just got to the point where I need to do something. I need to essentially save myself.
Yeah.
And that was when I became more familiar with things like brain rewiring or Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, nervous system regulation, right? So I was like, okay, I kind of like set this goal for myself. I remember like waking up at 5 a.m. in excruciating pain and being like, you need to go all in or you're not going to survive this. And that was that moment where I was giving myself 3 months to go 150% into this and try to see some progress. And so I just started like with something so simple as a gratitude journal. I was just like, okay, you know what? I'm grateful to even wake up today. I'm grateful that, my brother was super helpful. I'm grateful that my brother cooked me lunch today. I'm grateful that I'm alive. I started small with that, trying to see the small positives in every day. I started listening to people's healing stories that actually they healed. There's this beautiful documentary called Heal that was really helpful. I dove into so many books and teachings to try to shift my mindset to a more positive place because, when I was sitting in that like fear of I may not survive, that wasn't helping me move forward. It was, in my opinion, holding me back. Because once I said, no, I'm going to believe that my body's able to heal, is when I started seeing progress. So around that 8-month mark is when I started seeing improvements. So Yeah, so that was good. I mean, these improvements were very small, right? Like it was like, oh, I walked up the stairs without having to like double over. And, I ate something that didn't, leave me debilitated. I didn't need my cane for a day, right? So it was like these small things. And I just held so much space and gratitude for those little moments, and then continue to put my all in, continue to visualize and use brain rewiring that I could get to where I wanted to be. That's a long answer, but yeah, I was in the victim mindset for a while, and then I really focused on shifting that.
But something that you said was you focused on the small wins. Yeah, you were seeing progress, but they were small. But the small wins are what build up over time to the bigger ones. I've seen this quote. I'm sure you've seen this image too. It's a whole flight of stairs and someone standing at the bottom. And instead of trying to jump to the top, just do one small step at a time. And eventually you'll get to the top. And I think that's really profound. Like you're such a light just based on what you've been through and what you've overcome. You are such a light. Can you tell us how the journey of nervous system regulation and how that played a role and made an impact in your journey?
Yeah. So nervous system regulation was really important for me because a lot of times people who deal with neurological symptoms have dealt with something that affected their nervous system, some sort of trauma, right? So prior to my health issues, I had dealt with some really unhealthy abusive relationships.
Mm,
I had some chaos and bullying in my childhood that I essentially just stored in my body because I didn't have the tools to emotionally handle it, to cope with it, or to release it. I believe that a lot of my illness was also stemming from these emotional triggers. So if you've ever heard of The Body Keeps Score, is a great book.
mhm,
So much trauma was stuck in my body, and also then I had physical things wrong with me, right? Like I was dealing with pathogens and like a disease attacking my body. When I was going through my illness, I was so scared, right? Medical trauma is a real thing. Like anybody who deals with chronic illness, it then has to heal from the trauma that the chronic illness brought them. So, by starting to regulate my nervous system, I was able to have more capacity to handle these really scary things. And
mhm,
with that, it ended up helping me reduce my symptoms. So, for example, if I started having heart palpitations, then, your mind kind of runs away with that. Oh my God, am I okay? Is my heart rate getting too high? Let me check my blood pressure. Am I going to pass out? Is there anybody around me? Who should I call? Then you're like, am I dying? Am I okay? Am I going to survive this? Like, right. And then that builds. You start getting anxious. Then, because that adrenaline and that anxiety, then you start getting other symptoms, right? So then I start getting numb. And then I basically have this full blown panic attack that started because I dealt with a symptom.
mm.
So I learned to use nervous system regulation and different tools to cope with that, right? So then I had, say, for example, the same symptom that happened. Instead of letting my mind run away with it, I would use my favorite tool is tapping. I would use tapping and say, I am safe. I'm having a physical symptom, but that doesn't mean I am not safe in my body. It is okay to be experiencing this symptom because I'm actively working on my healing. And because I basically broke up that mind body connection of the panic and the fear, I was able to move through that symptom so much quicker, right? So before, that turned into a full blown panic attack, which lasted about 30 minutes. Whereas when I used this tool tapping, maybe 10 minutes later, I was feeling better, saying, okay, yep, that symptom moved through. Now I'm okay. And when you can regulate your nervous system and come back to safety, you're able to heal more because your nervous system needs to be in a state of rest and digest to continue healing, right? If you're in survival mode, your immune system is not focused on healing the body, it's focused on keeping you alive. So the more that you could come back to that rest and digest or that parasympathetic state, you could heal. So that was such a big part for me to come back every time I was triggered, to come back to safety afterwards so that my body could continue focus on healing.
Wow, that's so profound. How did you learn to trust your body again after overcoming this or on your way to overcoming it?
Yeah, I mean, that really took a long time, right? It wasn't just something that was overnight. And honestly, I didn't even realize for many years that I didn't trust myself. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with is not knowing that the distrust is there. So the first part is really asking yourself, where did this distrust start, right? So for me, there was many things that started this distrust, the unhealthy relationships, my illness, right? So that created this distrust in myself and in my body. So, because of my chronic illness, I felt betrayed by my physical body. Because of the unhealthy relationships, I didn't trust myself to keep myself healthy and to make good decisions for my safety and well-being, right? So it was kind of two parts. Um, also that feeling of burnout, right? I ignored all of the warning signs instead of being like, oh, yeah, my body's asking for a break or I'm pushing myself too hard. I ignored all these warning signs, which then created more distrust within myself because I didn't listen. I didn't slow down. Then I didn't even want to be in my body, right? I didn't feel safe in it. Why would I want to connect with my body deeper when I can't trust it? I don't feel safe in it. So, that first step was to really gain more clarity. Where did this distrust start? And then I had to rewire the subconscious mind around it, right? So, rewiring the brain is really helpful because you have a neural pathway or a thought pattern that says, I'm not safe in my body. My body betrayed me. Then you need to rewire that neural pathway so that way every time you come back to that thought pattern, it's not saying that. You have to create a new thought pattern, new neural pathway. Essentially, this is neuroplasticity, where you're creating a new neural pathway that is saying something else. And with repetition over time, you will naturally go to that new neural pathway instead of the old one. Now, it takes a lot of repetition to rewire the subconscious mind. So they say that actually rewiring the mind with joy and play rewires it faster than if you're not doing that because the emotional charge helps you rewire that pattern. And this is why a lot of trauma gets wired in because there's a negative emotional charge. You're scared, there's fear there, right? Shame, guilt, whatever it may be. And then you rewire that. You wire that into it's no longer safe, right? So for me, like I specifically had a really hard time driving again because I had to give up driving when I was sick because of many reasons, like my dizziness, worrying about passing out, the pain I was in, right? So my body and my mind said, this is no longer a safe activity because of that fear that wired it in. I didn't feel safe. I was scared. So then that wired, this is not safe. When I started driving again, my nervous system was like, this isn't safe. We don't want to do this, right? So then it caused chaos in my body. This doesn't feel good. We need to get out of here. We're going to freeze. We're going to shut down. We're going to have anxiety. So then I had to rewire and say, no, this is no longer my story. This is no longer true. I am fully capable of driving again. It is safe for me. So I had to rewire it. And basically, it looked like little bits by little bits, right? So I'd get in the car, I would do my tapping. This is safe for me. I can handle this. And then I would just drive around the block. That was it. Come home. The week after that, okay, I'm going to drive to the store, use my tapping. This is safe. And then eventually worked all the way up to driving on the highway again. But it was a process to really rewire this thought pattern. It takes a little bit of time to rebuild that trust within yourself and that safety, but I think it's about finding the right tools once you've figured out why. I'm a big fan of tapping. I've also used hypnotherapy. I've used somatic practices. I've used inner child work, mirror work. Creating self-love is a great way to just start with that, right? So if like, you don't have access to these tools or you don't know where to start, how can you love yourself more right now? How can you show up for yourself? Even just sticking to the things that you say you're going to do, it builds trust, right? So if you're like, I'm going to go to the store after work today, and then you do it, you've built trust in your body again because you stuck to a decision that you made.
Something that you said was that if you don't listen to your body, you will eventually end up into burnout. And when you get to burnout, then you don't trust your body anymore. And I thought that was so profound because it's something that even myself like would never think about, how overworking your mind, your body would lead to burnout. But not only burnout, you no longer have that trust with your body. It makes sense because if you're constantly not sleeping, then your body is not having that trust with you on giving you the rest when you need it. Wow.
Yeah.
What are some common barriers that keep people from embracing self-love after trauma?
The trauma is what is caused you to no longer love yourself. So, for example, for my journey, obviously I didn't love myself prior to being ill, right? There was a lot of stuff that came up in my childhood, these relationships that I involved myself in that were unhealthy were a reflection of the lack of self-love that I had, right? All of that stemmed from learned behaviors and trauma that I went through. I really feel that trauma is that core of it. And then when we can start working on healing that trauma, that is when we can start having more self-love.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You mentioned a little bit about how you were like essentially a dark night of the soul. Can you go into the journey of that and how it often leads to a beautiful transformation?
Dark night of the soul, I think, is essentially when you start questioning everything, your existence, what you're here for. It's essentially your rock bottom that
Okay.
shifts your life dramatically, right? So, for example, I was going down this one path that was ultimately not serving me, right? I was not dating great people. I was partying a ton. I was in this mentality of worth is equal to my success. So I was like grinding endlessly at this job, trying to make it. I had this vision for my life that just essentially is one of burnout and of this like, quote unquote rat race, right? And I was like, wow, this is really not serving me, but I didn't know that until I got to my rock bottom, right? Basically, I can look at my illness now and say I had to go through that because I was not on a path that was going to lead me to my higher self or where I'm at today if I didn't do that, right? So essentially, I went through this journey to really wake myself up and say, holy crap, that's not serving me. This is not the path I'm meant to go down. This is not the reason I'm here on this planet. This is not my purpose. So I needed to shift all of that. And over that 4-year time span of healing, I really looked at a lot of things that were coming up for me, a lot of trauma, a lot of healing that needed to be done on a mind, body, and soul level that essentially redirected me to the path that I was meant to go down. So I always feel that the dark night of the soul tends to be a more rock bottom place to redirect you to your actual path.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. It's like you hear the story of the dog sitting on the nail and the dog's crying, but why won't he get up? Because it doesn't hurt bad enough. And I think
Mm.
sometimes it's a hard truth, but that's how it is. We won't leave a situation or want to make a change until it hurts bad enough and we finally say, enough is enough and we deserve better and I'm going to do better for myself. I think that's so true. What message would you give to somebody who is currently going through this kind of transformation from a chronic illness and rebuilding their mindset and their body, all of that?
I think the biggest thing is just having compassion for yourself. Like, it's not an easy journey to go through any kind of dark night of the soul. So, mine looked like a health issue, but that's not necessarily what everybody's looks like. And I think it's more about just knowing you're going through this for a higher reason, a higher purpose. And can you trust the process? Can you trust the unknown that this is bringing you exactly where you need to be? Because everything, essentially you're at this rock bottom because you're being stripped of everything that's not serving you anymore, right? Everything that cannot go to this next version of you has to go. And it feels so painful and it feels like you're losing everything. But it's so that you can go through this rebirth process of becoming this next version of yourself. So, just the more compassion you can have, let yourself feel everything's coming up, nurture and pour back into yourself as you go through this is going to be so helpful for you to move through to the other side.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Can you explain to us what are common signs of a dysregulated nervous system?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of signs, and I think it really depends on the person. So there are different states of nervous system dysregulation, right? So we talk about a hyper arousal and a hypo arousal.
Okay.
And on the inside of that, though, is actually your window of tolerance, right? So you have a window of tolerance. This is your capacity and your resiliency to handle life stressors. When you're outside your window of tolerance, that's when you go into hyper or hypo arousal. Some people also call this like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, right? So you can go into any of those as well. So these could look like anxiety, overwhelm, high stress. You can be angry, a high heart rate, panic, difficulty sleeping, lack of patience, racing thoughts, feeling jumpy. The other side of that would be shutting down, completely shutting down. So you might get depressed, you might feel numb, you might feel frozen, you're
Mm.
unable to respond, you're unmotivated, you're disconnected, you're spaced out, you disassociate, right? So those are the two types you may be feeling, any of those symptoms. Now, what happens is this window of tolerance, when we go through trauma and triggers that are unhealed, shrinks, right? Our window of tolerance shrinks. So, like for example, with my chronic illness, my window of tolerance shrank a ton. And if I go back to that car story, right?
Sure.
The Originally my window of tolerance was big enough that I could drive, right? That was in my window of tolerance. But because my window of tolerance shrank and my world became smaller when I got chronically sick, I left the house a lot less. I couldn't do as many things. All of a sudden, everything that I once was able to handle has now shrunk to this smaller window of tolerance. Now driving was on the outside of my window of tolerance. So that was why every time I got in the car, my nervous system got dysregulated and I would experience some of these symptoms. So the idea behind nervous system regulation is you start expanding your window of tolerance so that you now have the capacity to handle more of life's stressors. Essentially, you become emotionally resilient. Yes, that's the long answer.
I love that though. It really goes back to taking it one step at a time and slowly expanding your horizons and expanding your capability in your mind. Because I think that's also where it starts is like, do you believe that you can do it? Is also how you rebuild that trust. Can you share some simple, effective practices that help calm the nervous system, especially when you were going through that journey in the beginning? All the way to where you are now, what are some mindfulness practices that help you?
Yeah, so there's so many things that regulate the nervous system. I think we tend to overcomplicate it and think that we need to do some big tool or have some tools in our toolkit to make it happen. But people don't realize that things as simple as putting your feet on the earth, going for a walk, like these things regulate your nervous system. Anything that you're doing that makes you feel safe and at peace is putting you back into regulation.
Yeah.
I think the other piece is that people don't realize is a healthy nervous system goes from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic state many times. And it's about if you're able to switch back to it, right? So the sympathetic state is the survival mode. What happens in nervous system dysregulation is we tend to get stuck in that state, right? So a healthy nervous system goes back and forth, right? Because say you're walking out in nature and then all of a sudden a dog comes running at you, you're going to switch into the sympathetic state. You're going to switch into survival and say, hey, am I okay? Once that threat is neutralized, right? Say the dog just came up to be pet, you can switch back into the parasympathetic state and say, oh no, I'm safe, right?
Yeah.
But someone who has nervous system dysregulation would stay stuck in that survival mode. They would not be able to switch back to this safety. And that's where we need to bring in tools. So, nervous system regulation also has to do with really healing the trauma that you've been through, right? We can do all of the nervous system regulation, but ultimately we want to heal what's triggering us. So then we don't need to use the tools to heal, right? So you want to heal from like that medical trauma. So that way you're not triggered every time you go to the doctor's office. So eventually you can get to a place where you can walk into the doctor's and it's not triggering you to even switch into the sympathetic. But until then, that's where we use these nervous system regulation tools. And I say always try to pick at least 3 a day to do so that your way you're helping your body relax. We tend to overcomplicate it. So I'll give you some tools, but I'll also let you know there's some things like something as simple as reading, knitting, coloring, listening to music, going out for a walk, laying out in the sun, putting your feet in the sand, like all of those things, if you feel safe while doing it and it brings you peace, is regulating. Now, if you're triggered and you find it's very hard for you to come back into the parasympathetic state and to come back into rest and digest, that's when I recommend like a tool. So something like EFT, which is emotional freedom technique, or tapping. This is my favorite tool because of how effective it is. You can do that. Other things you can do would be hypnotherapy, different style of breathing, like the 4-7-8 breath is a great one. You could also hum, or you can use this sound VOO, where it's literally just VOOO and you just say VOO. These are also going to help you regulate the nervous system. Because if you think about it, survival mode is trying to keep you safe.
Yeah.
If you were running from a tiger, would you have the capacity to hum? Absolutely not, right? That is not your first priority.
No.
If you're able to hum, you're telling your nervous system, we're completely safe. We can hum, we can sing, we can use this sound VOO. So those are some great tools. Hypnotherapy is a great tool. My favorite is emotional freedom technique.
Wow, thank you for sharing those. For somebody who is in fight or flight mode and they're getting out of that state of mind of the fight or flight, is it normal for someone to be more exhausted after? And is it okay to take more time to rest without feeling guilty? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Regulating your nervous system and healing emotionally is a lot of work, right? Even though it doesn't feel physical, you are still using a lot of energy. So, absolutely, like if you're doing deep emotional work, if you're regulating your nervous system, if you're rewiring your brain, if you're doing any kind of energetic work, even things like Reiki, these are all going to exhaust the body. So give yourself lots of compassion, give yourself time to rest, stay extra hydrated through these things.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing all of that. So before we go ahead and wrap things up, tell us, where can people find you? Where can they support you and stay in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So my Instagram is the best way to connect with me. I offer lots of free guided EFT practices on there. I post a lot about different ways to create safety in the body. So my link is healing w period Ness. So that's healing with Ness. Also, I offer a free workshop on EFT. So any listeners can check that out as well, or you can send me an email from my website.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'll have everything linked down in the show notes below so people can stay in touch. You have been such a light and you continue to be such a light. I hope that this helps a lot of people because you have so much valuable insights. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It was truly such an honor to be on here today.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Nourished Inside Out. I'm so thankful that you're here. Your support means so much, and I'm so excited to bring to you our very first Nourished Inside Out live virtual summit on April 26th and 27th. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, and pre-sale for tickets will be for a limited time. You can find the link in the show notes below for more information. See you there. And as always, keep growing and thriving.